How do we go from a word like tall to taller and then all the way to tallest? It seems super obvious, but the rules behind how we compare things in English are actually a perfect example of some really simple, elegant logic. So in this explainer, we're going to break that system down piece by piece.
Okay, let's dive right in. These three birds here, they're the perfect visual. One is tall, the next one is taller, and the last one, well, he's the tallest. The rules that let us do this are, believe it or not, surprisingly simple. It all just starts with a few basic building blocks.
So first things first, let's get our main ideas straight. When you want to compare anything in English, you really only need to know about two forms of an adjective. And once you get these two categories down, everything else just falls into place. Okay, so on the left, we've got the comparative. This is what you use when you're in a head-to-head showdown between exactly two things. So one bird is taller than the other. Simple enough. Then on the right, we have the superlative. This is for when you've got a group of three or more, and one of them is the big winner, the absolute tallest of them all. So, two things? Comparative. More than two? Superlative. It's really that straightforward. And now for the main event. This is the most common rule of them all, the one you probably use 100 times a day without even thinking twice about it. This right here is the engine that drives most of our everyday comparisons. And here it is. For those short, snappy, one-syllable words, you just tack on the end to compare two things, and you add est to crown the top dog in a group. It's clean, it's simple, and you see it absolutely everywhere.
And just look at how nice and neat this is. Long becomes longer, then longest. Slow becomes slower, then slowest. The pattern is just perfect. Quick, quicker, quickest. Small, smaller, smallest. It's a beautifully simple system, isn't it?
Of course, this is English, so it loves to have a few special cases. But don't worry, these little tweaks follow patterns that are just as logical as the main rule. Let's break them down.
All right, our first little tweak is all about efficiency. I guess English is just trying to be smart. If a word already ends with an E, the language doesn't make us add a whole other We just add the R or the est.
For instance, a nice comment is nicer than a rude one. We don't say nicer with two E's. That would just look and sound kind of awkward, right? Same for huge, huger, hugest. The language just tidies itself up. It's pretty neat. Okay, rule number 2. Now this one might look a little tricky at first glance, but there's a really good reason for it. When you have a short word with a short vowel sound, like the O in hot or the I in big, we double that final consonant. And why? Well, this little trick actually protects that short vowel sound. Without it, a word like hotter might get mispronounced hotter. You can see it in action right here. Hot becomes hotter, not hotter. Big becomes bigger. That extra G is doing a really important job. It keeps that is sound short and sharp. So it's a spelling rule that's actually all about sound. Now for our last little tweak, the Y ending. This is a classic spelling change you see all over English. And luckily for us, it follows a very predictable 3-step pattern. The process is really simple. Think of it like this. First, you spot that final Y. Next, you do a quick swap. The Y becomes an I. And finally, you just add the good old or est ending. Let's see what that actually looks like. And there you have it. A funny joke becomes funnier. A shiny car becomes the shiniest one on the whole block. The Y just flips over to an I, and then we add our ending. Wobbly, wobblier, wobbliest. It's pretty simple once you see that pattern, right?
So, we've totally mastered the short words. But what happens when adjectives start getting longer? Are we supposed to say interestinger? No way. Of course not. The whole system just kind of shifts gears.
Yeah, for longer words, we're talking usually 2 or more syllables. We just stop adding endings altogether. It would just sound clunky and be a real mouthful. Instead, we bring in some helper words, more or most, and we just place them right before the adjective. It's a much smoother solution.
Now, here's a really important detail to keep an eye out for. With certain word endings like full, less, ing, ed, or us, you always use more or most, even if the word feels kind of short. Think of words like hopeful, boring, or famous.
So an idea isn't interesting-er, it's more interesting. A person isn't famousest, they're the most famous. This simple rule just keeps longer words sounding clear and, honestly, a lot more elegant. One painting is simply more beautiful than another.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in a pretty short amount of time. So let's do a quick flyby of all the rules we've learned just to really lock them into place.
So here's your cheat sheet.
The basic rule, just add ER and EST. If a word ends in E, you just add the R and ST. Got a short vowel? Double that consonant. If it ends in Y, just change that Y to an I. And for the long words, easy. You just park more or most out front. And that's pretty much the entire system in a nutshell.
So, we've covered the rules, but English is absolutely famous for its rebels. You know, words like good, better, best that just play by their own set of rules entirely. So that kind of leaves us with one final question for you. What's the one irregular word in English that always makes you stop and think for a second? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.